I stood on the porch of my daughter's house, holding a small apple pie I'd baked myself that morning. My hands were shaking slightly, not from the cold November air that bit at my cheeks and made my breath visible in small puffs, but from nervousness that had been building in my chest for the entire 3-hour drive here. The pie wasn't perfect. The crust was a little uneven on one side where I'd tried to crimp it by hand the way Margaret used to, and I'd probably put too much cinnamon in the filling, going by smell and memory rather than the faded recipe card that was missing half its measurements. But I'd made it with love, with hope, with the desperate wish that maybe this would be the thing that bridged the gap between us. That had to count for something, didn't it? The house itself was magnificent in a way that made me uncomfortable. 3 stories of modern architecture, all glass and angles and expensive landscaping. Security lights had flicked on when I'd pulled into the circular driveway, illuminating me like I was on stage. My truck, a 2004 Ford F-150 with rust spots and a dent in the passenger door, looked embarrassingly out of place next to the BMW and the Tesla parked in front of the 3-car garage. Through the large bay window, I could see them all inside. Beautiful people in expensive clothes that probably cost more than my monthly pension, holding wine glasses that caught the light from the massive crystal chandelier hanging over what looked like a dining table that could seat 20. Laughter echoed through the door, the kind of easy, confident laughter that comes from people who've never worried about making rent or choosing between fixing the car and buying groceries. People who've never had to eat peanut butter sandwiches for a week to make sure their daughter had new shoes for school. My daughter Emily moved through the crowd like she'd been born to it, wearing a deep burgundy dress that hugged her figure and probably cost more than I'd spent on clothes in the last 5 years combined. Her hair was done in one of those complicated updos that require a professional, swept up and secured with what looked like genuine pearl pins. She looked happy, successful, confident, like she belonged in this world of chandeliers and catered food and people who'd never had to worry about anything. She looked nothing like the little girl who used to help me in my workshop on Saturday mornings, wearing overalls 3 sizes too big and safety goggles that kept sliding down her nose, asking me a million questions about how circuits worked and why electricity could flow through some things, but not others. The little girl who'd cried when she couldn't get the math right, and I'd stayed up with her until midnight showing her different ways to think about fractions. The little girl who'd hugged me so tight when I walked her to her first day of kindergarten that I'd had to pry her arms from around my neck. That little girl was gone, replaced by this elegant stranger who'd stopped returning my phone calls 2 years ago. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated, my knuckles hovering an inch from the expensive mahogany door. Maybe I should have called first. Maybe showing up unannounced was a mistake, a violation of some unspoken boundary I'd crossed without realizing. But when do you need permission to see your own daughter? When does your own child become someone you need an appointment to visit? But Mrs. Henderson next door had mentioned the dinner 3 days ago, casually, assuming I knew about it. "Oh, Emily's having quite the party Thursday. Very fancy," she said, catered from that expensive place downtown, the one where you need reservations 6 months in advance. Important business people, investors, her boss. You must be so excited. I'd smiled and nodded, not wanting to admit that my own daughter hadn't invited me, hadn't even told me about it. Hadn't mentioned it in the brief, awkward phone conversation we'd had 6 months ago when she'd called to ask if I could loan her money for some business expense I didn't understand. I'd sent what I could, $8,000, most of my savings, and received a 1-line text in response. Thanks. Not, thank you, Dad. Not, I love you. Not, I appreciate this. Just thanks, like I was some distant acquaintance who'd done her a minor favor. But I was her father. Blood is blood, family is family. Surely there was just some misunderstanding. Surely the invitation had gotten lost in the mail, or she'd meant to call me but got busy, or she'd assumed someone else had told me. Surely she'd want me there once she saw me, would hug me and tell me how glad she was that I'd come, would introduce me to her friends and colleagues with pride in her voice. Surely. I knocked. 3 firm raps that sounded louder than I'd intended in the quiet suburban evening, echoing off the expensive stonework of the porch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard footsteps inside, heavy and purposeful, and the door swung open. Blake Harrison stood there, my son-in-law, filling the doorway with his presence. He was wearing what I'd learned to recognize as a very expensive suit, tailored Italian wool in charcoal gray, with a silk tie that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. His hair was styled with that carefully casual look that actually requires expensive products and probably a professional stylist, every strand in place despite appearing windswept. His watch, I noticed because the light caught it, was a Rolex, the real kind, not one of those knockoffs you see at flea markets. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit hype to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from. When he saw me, his expression shifted in the span of a heartbeat. From polite greeting, the face he'd been wearing for whoever he'd expected to see, to something else, something colder. Disappointment, maybe, or disgust. His eyes traveled from my face down to my worn khakis, cleaned and pressed, but old, fraying slightly at the pockets, to my button-up shirt. My best one, the blue one Margaret had bought me for Father's Day 6 years ago, ironed 3 times this morning to make sure every crease was perfect. To my shoes, polished but old, the leather cracking slightly at the toes. I watched his jaw tighten, watched his nostrils flare slightly like he'd smelled something unpleasant. "What are you doing here?" he said, not even trying to hide the irritation in his voice. No greeting, no, "Hello, Robert," or "Good to see you," or any of the basic courtesies one human being extends to another. I held up the pie, suddenly acutely aware of how humble it looked in its simple glass dish, covered with aluminum foil that I'd crimped around the edges. How homemade and modest it was compared to whatever elaborate catered desserts were probably waiting inside. "Hello, Blake. I brought pie. For Thanksgiving dinner. Apple. It was Margaret's recipe, the one Emily always loved when she was little." He glanced at the pie the way you might glance at a dead animal in the road, acknowledgement without interest, already thinking about how to get rid of it. Then his eyes came back to my face, and there was something in his expression that made my stomach clench with dread. "We're hosting powerful people tonight," he said, his voice low but sharp, each word carefully enunciated like he was speaking to someone who might not understand English very well. "Important guests, business associates, investors, industry leaders, people who matter. This isn't appropriate." The words hit me like a slap, but I tried to keep my voice steady, tried to maintain my dignity. "I'm Emily's father. I just wanted to. I thought I could spend Thanksgiving with my daughter. It's been so long since—" "You'll embarrass us," he interrupted, not even letting me finish my sentence. His voice was flat, matter of fact, like he was explaining why the sky was blue or water was wet. A simple truth that anyone should understand. "Look at you. Look at them." He gestured behind him with one manicured hand, and I couldn't help but follow his gesture. Through the doorway, past his shoulder, I could see the glittering crowd. Women in designer dresses, dripping with jewelry that caught the light, men in custom suits, holding expensive bourbon in crystal glasses, a woman laughing, her head thrown back, diamond earrings sparkling, a man gesturing animatedly, his tie clip, gold, probably real gold, flashing as he moved, and then there was me, 68 years old, shoulders slightly stooped from 4 decades of bending over circuit boards and machinery, hands calloused and scarred from years of working with tools and wire, face lined with age and grief and 3 years of loneliness since Margaret died, wearing my best clothes, which wouldn't buy 1 bottle of the wine they were drinking inside. "We've moved up in the world," Blake continued, and now his voice carried an edge of pride, of satisfaction. "We're building something here, creating connections, making impressions, establishing ourselves among people who matter. And you—" He looked me up and down again, more deliberately this time, his lip curling slightly. "You don't fit. You're a reminder of humble beginnings, of where Emily came from, and that's not the story we're telling tonight." "I don't understand," I said, though I was beginning to see what I'd been refusing to acknowledge for 3 years. "I'm her father. I raised her. I love her." "And she appreciates that," Blake said, in the tone of voice someone might use to dismiss a child's tantrum. "But this is business. This is our future, and sometimes you have to leave the past behind to move forward." He put his hand on the door, preparing to close it. His gold wedding ring, Emily's mother's ring, actually, the one Margaret had worn for 30 years that I'd given to Emily when she got married, glinted in the porch light. "You should go. Come back another time, when it's just family, not when we have important people here." "But I am family," I said, and I hated, absolutely hated, the way my voice cracked on that last word. Hated the desperation I could hear in my own tone. "I'm her father. I'm the one who—" "Not tonight, you're not," Blake said flatly, and started to close the door. That's when Emily appeared behind him. For a moment, just one brief, shining moment, hope flared in my chest like a match struck in darkness. She'd fix this. She had to. She'd tell Blake he was being ridiculous, that of course her father was welcome, that family always comes first no matter what. She'd invite me in with a hug and an apology, would introduce me to her friends with pride, would make this awful moment disappear like it had never happened, but she didn't. She stood there in her expensive burgundy dress, diamonds at her throat. When had she gotten diamonds? I'd never seen those before. Her hair perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, part embarrassment, part pity, part something else, something colder. "Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she didn't want the guests inside to hear, as if my very presence was something to be ashamed of, something to be hidden. "What are you doing here?" The question shouldn't have hurt as much as it did, but combined with Blake's rejection, with the way she was looking at me, it felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. "I came for Thanksgiving," I said, and I could hear the pleading note in my own voice now, the desperation of a man who knows he's losing something precious and can't figure out how to hold on to it. "I know I wasn't invited, but I hoped that maybe it was just an oversight, that you'd want to see me. It's been so long, Emily. 6 months since we've talked, 3 years since I've actually seen you in person, and I missed you. I missed my little girl." Something flickered across her face. Pain, maybe. Or guilt. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that carefully controlled expression I'd seen her practicing in the mirror when she was in high school, preparing for debate competitions, the mask she wore when she needed to win an argument. "Dad, you should have called," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. It's complicated. It's not a family dinner, it's a business event. Blake and I are trying to impress some very important people, and..." Behind them, someone laughed loudly, a man's voice, booming and confident, carrying easily through the open door. "Is that the caterer? Someone tell him to use the back entrance." "Christ, Emily, I thought you said you hired professionals." More laughter, a woman's voice, high and nasal. "Wait, is that actually her father? The one Blake was telling us about? What was it? Machine worker?" "Machinist," another voice corrected, female, dripping with the kind of condescension that comes from people who think manual labor is something other people do. "He fixed machines or something, very blue-collar, very quaint." "Oh, God," the first woman said, and I could hear the horrified delight in her voice, the kind of tone people use when they're gossiping about someone else's embarrassment. "He actually showed up? Does he even have clean clothes? Emily, honey, you need to handle this before anyone important sees." "Someone should tell him to wait outside with the dogs," a man's voice suggested, and there was laughter. Actual laughter. "This is mortifying." Each word was a knife, but what made it unbearable was that Emily wasn't defending me, wasn't telling them to shut up, to show respect, to remember that I was a human being and her father and deserving of basic decency. She just stood there, her face flushing red, looking at me with those eyes that said, "Please, please just leave. Please don't make this harder than it already is." "Emily," I said softly, "tell them to stop." She looked down at the floor. "Dad, please don't make a scene. We've worked so hard to get here, to build this life, these connections, to establish ourselves among people who matter. And She trailed off, but I heard what she didn't say as clearly as if she'd screamed it. "And you're embarrassing me. You're ruining this. You're a reminder of everything I'm trying to leave behind." Blake put his hand on the door, his face hard now, all pretense of politeness gone. "You need to leave, now, before you embarrass us any further. This is our home, our event, and you're not welcome here." "Not welcome," I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "In my own daughter's home, on Thanksgiving." "It's not personal," Blake said, which was possibly the biggest lie I'd ever heard. "It's just business. You understand business, don't you? You worked in a factory for what, 40 years? You must understand that sometimes you have to make hard choices for your career." "I understand that I raised Emily to have integrity," I said, looking past him to my daughter. "I raised her to value family over money, to treat people with kindness and respect, to never forget where she came from or who helped her get where she is." My voice cracked. I guess I failed. Emily flinched like I'd struck her. Good. Let her feel something. Let her carry at least that much guilt for what she was doing. "Dad, you don't belong here," she said finally. And those 5 words destroyed something in me that I didn't know could be destroyed. Some last fragile hope that my daughter was still in there somewhere, that the woman I'd raised wasn't completely gone. I looked at her for a long moment, memorizing her face. The little girl who'd sat on my shoulders at the zoo, who'd fallen asleep on my chest during scary movies, who'd cried on my shoulder when her first boyfriend broke her heart, who'd asked me to walk her down the aisle because I was the first man she'd ever loved. She was gone. Erased. Replaced by this stranger in a designer dress who looked at me like I was something shameful, something to be discarded. "You're right," I said quietly, my voice thick with unshed tears. "I don't belong here. I don't belong anywhere that values money over love, appearances over integrity, status over family." I looked down at the pie in my hands. Margaret's recipe, made with hope and memory and love. Your mother would be ashamed of you. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't contradict me, didn't defend herself. Just stood there, crying silently while Blake's hand tightened on her shoulder in what might have been support or might have been a warning. I turned to leave, my vision blurring, my heart actually aching in my chest like a physical wound. I'd made it 3 steps down the pristine walkway, past the ornamental shrubs that probably required a gardener to maintain when I heard it. "Partner, wait." The voice was deep, authoritative, and completely unexpected. It cut through the evening air like a bell, clear and commanding. I turned, nearly dropping the pie. A man stood in the doorway, having pushed past Blake and Emily with the kind of casual authority that suggested he was used to being obeyed. He was in his 60s, tall and distinguished, with silver hair that gleamed in the porch light, and a face that managed to be both kind and formidable. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my truck, but he wore it like he'd been born in it, comfortable and natural. And he was looking directly at me with an expression of recognition and something that looked like relief. The entire house had gone silent. Through the window, I could see every single guest had stopped talking, stopped drinking, stopped whatever they were doing to watch what was happening. Some had moved closer to the door, craning their necks to get a better view. The party had ceased to exist, replaced by this frozen moment of collective curiosity. The man walked down the porch steps toward me, his hand extended, a smile breaking across his face. "Robert Chen. Is that really you? Robert Chen from Midwest Manufacturing?" I stared at him, my mind scrambling to place the face, the voice. He looked familiar, but I couldn't... Wait. The silver hair had thrown me off, but the eyes were the same. And the voice. That voice I'd heard on the phone, panicked and desperate, at 8 o'clock at night 15 years ago. "James?" I said hesitantly, my voice rough with emotion. "James Whitmore?" His smile widened, genuine and warm, and he grabbed my hand with both of his, shaking it firmly. "You remember. Thank God. I was afraid after all these years you might not recognize me." He pulled me into an embrace that caught me completely off guard, this near stranger hugging me like I was a long-lost brother, right there on my daughter's lawn while everyone watched. When he released me, I could see tears in his eyes. Actual tears. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Of all the places, of all the people, what are the odds?" I gestured helplessly at the house, at Emily and Blake standing frozen in the doorway. "This is my daughter's house. I came for Thanksgiving, but apparently I'm not." "Your daughter?" James's expression shifted, his eyes widening. He turned to look at Emily and Blake with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Emily Harrison is your daughter? Emily's your daughter?" "Yes," I said, not understanding his shock. "Why?" "Because," James said slowly, deliberately, his voice carrying clearly in the silent evening, "I'm the guest of honor at this party. I'm your daughter's biggest investor, her boss's boss. The reason for this entire elaborate dinner." He turned to face Emily and Blake fully, and I watched his expression cool by degrees, warmth replaced by something harder. "And apparently, the reason her father is being turned away at the door." I need to back up. I need to explain how I ended up standing on that porch, how my relationship with my daughter deteriorated so completely that she could look me in the eye and tell me I didn't belong. My name is Robert Chen. I'm 68 years old. I spent 42 years working as an electrical engineer, most of that time at a mid-sized manufacturing company in Ohio. I wasn't famous. I wasn't rich. But I was good at my job. Really good. I could look at a circuit board or a design schematic and see things other people missed, the flaws, the inefficiencies, the potential points of failure. My wife Margaret used to joke that I could fix anything except my own cooking. She wasn't wrong. After she died 3 years ago, I learned to make about 5 meals competently. Everything else was a disaster. Emily was our only child. We'd wanted more, but Margaret had complications after Emily's birth, and more children just weren't in the cards for us. So we poured everything we had into raising her. Every soccer game, every science fair, every parent-teacher conference, we were there. Margaret was the warm one, the hugger, the one who could make Emily laugh even when she was in the worst teenage mood. I was the quiet one, showing love through actions rather than words, teaching her how to change a tire and balance a checkbook and think logically through problems. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. We saved for her college, made sure she had what she needed, taught her the value of hard work and integrity. When she graduated with a degree in business, I was so proud I actually cried during the ceremony. Margaret elbowed me and whispered, "That's my girl," but her eyes were just as wet. Emily got a job at a marketing firm in the city, started at the bottom, worked her way up. She'd call once a week, tell us about her projects, her coworkers, her small apartment that cost more than our mortgage. Margaret and I would listen and encourage her and tell her how proud we were. Then she met Blake. Blake Harrison came from money, real money. His father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships. His mother sat on the boards of 3 different charities and had her photo in the society pages regularly. Blake himself worked in finance, the kind of job that sounded important, but I never quite understood what he actually did all day. Emily brought him home for dinner about 6 months into their relationship. He was polite enough to Margaret and me, but there was something in his eyes when he looked around our modest house, a kind of judgment, or maybe pity. He made comments about upgrading and potential that made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't quite articulate why. They got married a year later in a ceremony that cost more than I'd spent on my first car. Blake's family paid for most of it, which was good because we couldn't have afforded it. I walked Emily down the aisle in a rented tux, and when I gave her away, she whispered, "Thank you for everything, Dad. I love you." I believed her. God help me, I believed her. The change happened gradually. At first, it was just that she was busy. The calls came less frequently, once every 2 weeks, then once a month. When Margaret got sick, Emily visited twice in 6 months, staying less than an hour each time because she had important meetings to get back to. Blake never came at all. When Margaret died, Emily came to the funeral. She cried appropriately, hugged the right people, said the right things. But 3 days later, she was gone, back to her life in the city. She called once a week after the funeral, asking if I was okay. I said I was fine, because what else could I say? That I was drowning in grief and silence. That the house felt like a mausoleum. That I couldn't remember which of the 5 meals I knew how to cook I'd already eaten that week. After that, the calls stopped altogether. I tried calling her. Sometimes she'd answer, her voice distracted, saying she was in the middle of something and could she call me back? She never did. Sometimes it went straight to voicemail, and I'd leave messages that went unreturned. I tried visiting once, driving the 3 hours to the city and showing up at the apartment Blake's parents had bought for them. Emily answered the door in yoga pants and a face mask, clearly not expecting company. She didn't invite me in. We stood in the hallway while she explained she was busy, had a thing that evening, really should have called first, Dad. Maybe next time? There was no next time. I didn't try again. I told myself she was just busy, building her career, building her life. That's what kids do. They grow up and move on. It's natural. It's healthy. The ache in my chest every time I thought about her was just part of being a parent, wasn't it? This was what I'd raised her for, to be independent, to succeed. But then the money requests started. Dad, could you help with a down payment? We found the perfect house. Dad, Blake's starting a new venture. Could you invest? It's a sure thing. Dad, we're renovating. Do you still have that savings account? We could really use... I helped when I could, sent what I could afford, but it was never quite enough, and it always came with a tone of disappointment when I couldn't do more. As if the 42 years of work, the college fund, the small inheritance from Margaret's parents that we'd split with Emily, as if none of that mattered, because I couldn't pull 5 figures out of thin air whenever they wanted it. Blake's attitude toward me changed from polite disinterest to open disdain. In the few phone conversations where he picked up instead of Emily, he'd make comments about stepping up and doing better by your daughter. Once he said, "Emily deserves a better father," and hung up before I could respond. That one kept me up at night for weeks. I tried to figure out what I'd done wrong. Had I not given enough? Had I failed somehow in raising her? Had I been too strict, too lenient, too distant, too overbearing? I replayed 32 years of memories, looking for the moment where it all went sideways, but I couldn't find it. All I saw was a little girl I'd loved with my whole heart, who'd grown into a woman who couldn't be bothered to return my phone calls. So when Mrs. Henderson mentioned the Thanksgiving dinner, my first instinct was to ignore it. Emily didn't want me there. She'd made that clear through 3 years of absence and indifference. But it was Thanksgiving, and she was my daughter. And Margaret's voice in my head said, "Don't give up on her, Robert. Family doesn't give up." So I baked a pie, Margaret's recipe, the one she always made for holidays, and I drove to the address Mrs. Henderson had given me. The house was in an expensive neighborhood, the kind with gates and security and landscaping that required a team to maintain. I almost turned around 3 times, but I didn't, and that's how I ended up on that porch, holding a pie, being told I didn't belong by my own child. James Whitmore kept his arm around my shoulders as he turned to face Emily and Blake, who stood frozen in the doorway. The crowd of guests behind them had pressed closer, craning their necks to see what was happening. The festive atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Emily," James said, and his voice had gone from warm to ice cold in an instant. "This is your father?" Yes, Mr. Whitmore, but Emily started, her face pale. The father you told me was deceased. The words hung in the air like a bomb. I felt my stomach drop. Emily had told people I was dead? I never said, Emily stammered. I said he wasn't in the picture. That's not the same. You implied it, James said flatly. On multiple occasions. When I asked about your family, you said you had no one. That you'd built everything from nothing, with no support, no help, no family connections. He looked at me, then back at her. Was that a lie, Emily? Mr. Whitmore, please, let me explain. Blake stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. I'm not talking to you, James snapped, not even looking at him. I'm talking to Emily, and I'm waiting for an answer. Emily's mouth opened and closed. A tear ran down her cheek, smearing her perfect makeup. I just wanted to seem more impressive, more self-made. You talk about how you built your company from nothing, and I wanted to be like that. I wanted you to see me as someone who pulled themselves up without any advantages. So you erased your father from your story, James said quietly. You pretended he didn't exist? To impress me, to seem more, sympathetic? Worthy of investment? It wasn't like that, Emily whispered. Then what was it like? James turned to me. Robert, how long since you've spoken to your daughter? She called about 6 months ago, I said, my voice rough. Asked if I could loan her $20,000 for her business. And did you? I sent what I could. $8,000. It was most of my savings. James closed his eyes briefly, his jaw tightening. And before that? Christmas, 2 years ago. She sent a card. Did she visit you? Not since my wife's funeral, 3 years ago. A murmur ran through the crowd. I saw a woman in a red dress whisper something to the man next to her, both of them looking at Emily with expressions of shock and judgment. James turned back to Emily and Blake. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. Your father, this man right here, has been alive and available for your entire life. He raised you, presumably paid for your education, gave you what he could, and in return, you've abandoned him, lied about him, and are now refusing to let him into your home on Thanksgiving while you throw a party to impress your business associates. Mr. Whitmore, Blake tried again. And you, James said, finally acknowledging Blake's existence. You're the one who told me Emily came from humble but non-existent family origins. You're the one who pitched your investment opportunity as a way to help a young couple with no safety net build something from scratch. Was any of that true? Blake's face had gone red. We are building from scratch. Just because she has a father doesn't mean she had advantages. Her father is Robert Chen, James said, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. The name hung there. I saw several of the guests react, their eyes widening. Blake and Emily just looked confused. You don't even know who he is, James said, shaking his head. My God, Emily, you really don't know. Should I? Emily asked, defensive now. James looked at me. May I tell them? I shrugged. I still felt numb, disconnected from the whole scene, like I was watching it happen to someone else. James addressed the crowd, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding rooms full of important people. In 2008, I was 3 months away from bankruptcy. My company manufactured precision electronics, circuit boards mainly, for the automotive industry. We just landed the biggest contract of our lives with a major car company. Everything was riding on it. And then we discovered a design flaw, a critical flaw that would cause failure after about 50,000 cycles. We had 6 weeks to fix it or lose everything. He paused, and I saw some of the guests nodding, recognition dawning. This story was apparently famous in certain circles. I hired every consultant I could find, engineers from MIT, Stanford, everywhere. No one could solve it. The math didn't work. The physics didn't work. We were looking at a $50 million loss and complete company collapse. I had 200 employees who were about to lose their jobs, and I was about to lose everything I'd spent 20 years building. James put his hand on my shoulder. And then someone suggested I call Robert Chen. He was working at a small manufacturing company in Ohio, had a reputation for solving impossible problems. I called him at 8 at night, desperate. He listened to me explain the problem for 5 minutes, then said, I'll be there tomorrow. I remembered that call. Remembered the fear in James's voice, the edge of desperation that made me cancel my weekend plans and drive 6 hours to his facility. He showed up with a notebook and a thermos of coffee, James continued. Spent 16 hours straight analyzing the design, and at 2 a.m, he found it. A tiny error in the impedance calculation that every other engineer had missed. He redesigned the circuit, we manufactured new boards, and we delivered on time. That contract saved my company. More than that, it made my company. We went from nearly bankrupt to a $50 million valuation in 3 years. Today, Whitmore Electronics is worth $2.3 billion. The crowd was silent now, every eye on me. I offered Robert a job, James said. Executive position, 6-figure salary, stock options. He turned me down, said he was happy where he was, that he didn't need more than he had. I offered him money, a consulting fee, a finder's fee, whatever he wanted. He charged me exactly what his company charged for his hourly rate. 16 hours at $75 an hour, $1,200 to save my entire company. Emily was staring at me now like she'd never seen me before. Blake looked like he might be sick. I've tried to pay Robert back for years, James said. Send him Christmas gifts, invitations to company events, opportunities to invest at ground floor rates. He's turned down everything, said he was just doing his job, that he didn't need thanks. He looked at me with something like wonder. You're the most humble man I've ever met, Robert, and probably the most brilliant. I just saw what others missed, I said quietly. It wasn't that complicated. It was impossibly complicated, James countered. And you solved it in 16 hours. Do you know how many engineers we'd had working on it for weeks? He turned back to Emily. This man, your father, saved not just my company, but the jobs of 200 people, some of whom are in this room tonight. And you're treating him like an embarrassment. The silence was deafening. Then James said the words that changed everything. If Robert Chen isn't welcome at this table, then neither am I. Emily's face had gone from pale to ashen, the color draining so quickly I thought she might faint. Her hand reached out, gripping the doorframe for support. Mr. Whitmore, please, you're misunderstanding the situation. Am I? James's voice was ice cold now. All the warmth he'd shown me evaporated. He looked around at the crowd of guests, all of whom were now pressed against windows and gathered in the doorway, watching this scene unfold like it was dinner theater. How many of you know who I am? Every hand would have gone up if they could move. Instead, there were nods, murmurs of recognition, a few whispered, "Yes, Mr. Whitmores," from the braver souls. And how many of you came here tonight specifically because you knew I was going to be here? Because you wanted to network with me, to make connections, to potentially do business with Whitmore Electronics? The murmurs grew louder. Most of the crowd looked uncomfortable now, shifting their weight, avoiding eye contact with each other. A woman in an emerald dress whispered something to the man beside her, who shook his head slightly. That's what I thought, James said. And Emily, Blake, how many of your guests did you invite specifically because you wanted to impress me? To show me that you run in important circles, that you're connected, that investing in your company means investing in a network of influential people? Blake opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Mr. Whitmore, that's standard business practice. Building networks, creating opportunities for partnerships. Don't. James held up one hand, and Blake's mouth snapped shut like he'd been slapped. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this was anything other than using your guests and me as props in your theater of success. I've been in business for 40 years, young man. I know exactly what you were doing. He turned back to Emily, and his voice softened slightly, though the steel underneath remained. When I asked you about your family background, Emily, what did you tell me? Emily's voice was barely a whisper. I said I came from humble origins. And when I asked if you had family support in building your business, I said I didn't, that I'd done it all myself. And when I asked specifically if your parents were still alive, if they were involved in your life, what did you say? Silence. Emily stared at the ground, tears streaming down her face now, ruining her perfect makeup. Answer the question, Emily, James said, his voice still gentle but implacable. I said I had no family, she whispered, that I was alone, that I'd built everything from nothing. A gasp ran through the crowd. I saw several people look at me with new understanding, with sympathy and shock, and something that looked like embarrassment for having laughed earlier. You led me to believe, James continued, his voice carrying clearly in the night air, that you were an orphan, or as good as, that you'd pulled yourself up by your bootstraps with no help, no support, no family to fall back on. And I was moved by that story. I invested $3 million in your company because I believed you were the kind of self-made person who understood the value of success built through adversity. He looked at me, then back at her. But this man, your father, has been alive and available your entire life, hasn't he? Yes, Emily whispered. And he raised you? Paid for your education? Yes. And when your mother died 3 years ago, I remember you taking that week off, telling me about your grief. He was there for you, wasn't he? He tried to be. But you pushed him away, and then you erased him from your story, made him disappear so you could seem more impressive, more sympathetic, more worthy of investment. James shook his head slowly. Do you know what that tells me about your character, Emily? She didn't answer. It tells me you're willing to lie to get what you want. It tells me you value appearances over truth. It tells me that when you talk about your company's values, integrity, authenticity, transparent communication, those are just buzzwords, marketing copy, not actual principles you live by. Mr. Whitmore, please. Blake stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture that looked almost pleading. This is a misunderstanding. Emily never meant to imply. Yes, she did, James said flatly. And you helped her. You're the one who sent me the pitch deck, remember? The one with the founder's story that talked about overcoming personal tragedy and building success without family support. You crafted that narrative together. Blake's face went red. We were talking about her mother's death, the tragedy of losing her support system. Her father was still alive. James's voice rose for the first time, sharp with anger. Her father was right there, willing and able to support her, and you both wrote him out of existence because it made for a better story. Because investors like tales of overcoming adversity, and having a living, loving parent doesn't fit that narrative as neatly. He took a breath, visibly calming himself. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled, but no less devastating. Let me tell you all a story, he said, addressing the crowd now. In 2008, I was 3 months away from bankruptcy. My company manufactured precision electronics, circuit boards primarily, for the automotive industry. We just landed the biggest contract of our lives, a $50 million deal with one of the major car manufacturers. Everything was riding on it, our entire future, the jobs of 200 employees, everything I'd spent 20 years building. The crowd had gone completely silent now. Even the people inside had stopped pretending to do anything else, had gathered at the windows and doorway to listen. And then we discovered a design flaw, James continued. A critical flaw that would cause complete system failure after approximately 50,000 cycles. We had 6 weeks to identify and fix the problem, or we'd lose the contract, face a massive lawsuit, and probably go bankrupt. 6 weeks to solve a problem that our entire engineering team couldn't crack. He paused, and I saw recognition dawning on some faces. This story was apparently well known in certain business circles, though I'd never heard it told publicly before. I hired every consultant I could find, James said. Engineers from MIT, Stanford, Caltech, experts who charged thousands of dollars an hour. No one could solve it. The math didn't work, the physics didn't work. We were looking at certain failure, certain bankruptcy, and there was nothing I could do about it. His hand found my shoulder again, and he smiled at me with something like wonder. And then someone, I don't even remember who anymore, suggested I call Robert Chen. Said he worked at a small manufacturing company in Ohio, had a reputation for being able to see things other engineers missed, so I called him. At 8 o'clock at night, desperate and terrified and certain I was about to lose everything I'd worked for. I explained the problem in 5 minutes, expecting him to tell me he'd need days or weeks to even assess whether it was solvable. James looked at me. What did you say, Robert? I remembered that call so clearly, remembered hearing the fear in this stranger's voice, the desperation that came through the phone line like a living thing. I said I'd be there the next day. You drove 6 hours on a Saturday, James said to the crowd. Canceled your weekend plans, didn't even ask how much I'd pay you, just said you'd come, and you showed up at my facility at 8 in the morning with a notebook and a thermos of coffee. He laughed, but it was a laugh tinged with emotion. Do you remember what you said when I offered you lunch? I smiled despite everything. I said I'd brought sandwiches from home, didn't want to waste time. Peanut butter and jelly, James said. I remember because I thought, what kind of engineering consultant brings peanut butter sandwiches to $1 million problem? But you did, and you sat at a workstation and you studied our designs for 16 hours straight. 16 hours without substantial breaks, without complaining, just working. He turned back to the crowd. And at 2 in the morning, when my entire team had gone home and I was sitting in my office trying to figure out how to tell 200 people they were about to lose their jobs, Robert knocked on my door. He'd found it. A tiny error in the impedance calculation that every other engineer, including PhDs from the best schools in the country, had missed. He showed me the problem, explained the solution, and redesigned the circuit right there. By morning, we had working prototypes. We delivered the contract on time, and it saved my company. The silence was absolute. I could hear the wind rustling through the trees, a car passing on the street 2 blocks away. That contract turned us from a struggling mid-sized manufacturer into a major player, James said. We went from nearly bankrupt to a $50 million valuation in 3 years. Today, Whitmore Electronics is worth $2.3 billion. We employ over 1,500 people. We're one of the leading electronics manufacturers in North America. He paused. And none of that would exist without Robert Chen. He looked at Emily, and I saw something like sadness in his expression now. Do you know what I offered your father, Emily? She shook her head mutely. I offered him a job, executive position, vice president of engineering, 6-figure salary with stock options that would be worth millions today. I offered him a partnership stake in the company. I offered him consulting contracts, board positions, investment opportunities. James laughed softly. Do you know what he said? No, Emily whispered. He said he was happy where he was, that he liked his job, liked his town, liked his life, that he didn't need more than he had. Oh, I tried to pay him consulting fees. Wanted to give him $100,000 minimum for solving an unsolvable problem. You know what he charged me? The crowd was leaning in now, desperate to hear the answer. 16 hours at $75 an hour. His standard rate through his company, $1,200 to save my entire business, my career, my employees' livelihoods. And when I tried to pay him more, tried to give him bonuses or gifts or anything, he refused. Said he'd just done his job. James's voice grew harder now, colder. For 15 years, I've been trying to pay your father back, Emily, sending him Christmas gifts that he returns or gives away, inviting him to company events that he politely declines, offering him investment opportunities at ground floor rates that he waves off. He's turned down everything, every attempt I've made to thank him properly for quite literally saving my life's work. He looked around at all the guests, at the people who'd come here to network and impress and climb their way higher up the social ladder. Your father, Emily, is the most humble man I've ever met, and probably the most brilliant, and you're treating him like he's an embarrassment, like he's something to be ashamed of and hidden away. The woman in the emerald dress stepped forward, and I recognized her now as James's wife, Victoria. She looked at Emily with an expression of profound disappointment. James, dear, she said gently, I think we should go. I agree, James said. He turned to me. Robert, I'm assuming you haven't eaten yet? No, sir. Neither have I. Not really. I've been standing around making small talk for an hour, eating canapes that cost $20 each and taste like cardboard, pretending to be impressed by people trying desperately to impress me. And I'm tired of it. There's a diner about 20 minutes from here. Frank's Place, do you know it? I nodded. I'd driven past it on the way here. Best turkey dinner in the state. Real mashed potatoes, stuffing made from scratch, gravy that tastes like your grandmother made it, and they're open on Thanksgiving specifically for people who don't have anywhere else to go. People like us, apparently. Would you join me? Please? I'd much rather spend the holiday with someone who knows what actually matters than continue with this. He gestured dismissively at the elaborate party, the ice sculptures and champagne fountains and carefully curated guest list. I couldn't impose. You'd be doing me a favor. And besides, he smiled, we have 15 years of catching up to do. I want to hear about your life, your work, everything. And I want to finally, properly thank you for what you did for me. Mrs. Whitmore, Victoria, stepped forward. We'd love to have you, Mr. Chen, and James is right about Frank's. The pie alone is worth the drive. I brought pie, I said stupidly, holding up my slightly lopsided apple pie like an offering. Victoria's face lit up. Homemade? Even better. We'll bring it with us. She took it from my hands gently, cradling it like it was precious. Frank won't mind if we contribute dessert. James raised his voice, addressing the crowd. Anyone else want to join us? Anyone here who'd rather have an honest meal with good people than continue pretending that this? He gestured at the house, the party, Emily and Blake standing frozen in the doorway. Is something worth celebrating? I looked at Emily. Really looked at her. This woman I'd raised, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged and whose nightmares I'd chased away. This woman whose hand I'd held at her mother's funeral, whose college education I'd worked overtime to afford, whose first car I'd helped her buy. She was staring at the ground now, tears streaming down her face. Blake had his arm around her, but he looked more angry than comforting. Part of me wanted to stay, to fix this, to make it better, to be the father who could smooth over any problem. That's what I'd always done, wasn't it? Stepped in, solved the unsolvable, made everything okay. But Margaret's voice in my head said something different this time. Sometimes love means letting them face the consequences, Robert. Sometimes that's the only way they learn. Yes, I said to James. I'd like that very much. We walked to the cars, a convoy of expensive vehicles that probably cost more combined than my house. James rode with me in my old truck. sitting in the passenger seat without complaint, even though the upholstery was cracked and the heating didn't work quite right. "You didn't have to do that," I said as I started the engine. "Yes, I did," James replied. "I owe you my company, Robert, my entire career, everything I have, and beyond that—" He paused. "My father died when I was young. If I had him back for even 5 minutes, I'd give anything. The fact that Emily has you and treats you like that, it's unconscionable. She's just trying to succeed, to build something, at the cost of her integrity, at the cost of basic human decency." He shook his head. "That's not success, Robert. That's just ambition without a soul." We drove in silence for a moment. Then James said, "I meant what I said about withdrawing my investment, and I'm going to do one better." "What do you mean?" "I'm going to make sure every investor in my network knows what happened tonight. Not out of spite, but because people should know who they're doing business with. Emily and Blake built their company on lies and manipulation. That kind of foundation always crumbles eventually." "She's going to lose everything," I said quietly. "Maybe. Or maybe she'll learn something. Maybe she'll rebuild with actual integrity this time." He glanced at me. "Would you bail her out if she asked?" I thought about that. Really thought about it. "I don't know," I admitted. "She's my daughter, but I can't keep enabling her. Can't keep letting her take and take without ever giving back." "That's wisdom talking," James said. "It took me years to learn that lesson with my own kids. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you don't love them. Sometimes it means you love them enough to let them fail." The diner was exactly as James described, a small, slightly run-down place with red vinyl booths and a counter with rotating pie displays. The kind of place Margaret and I used to love, where the food was simple but good and the waitresses called everyone Han. We took over the back section, 15 of us crowding into booths meant for 4. The owner, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour on her apron, looked bemused but happy to have the business. "Thanksgiving special for everyone," James announced. "Turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, the works. And bring us every pie you have." The food came out family style, on big plates we passed around. The turkey was dry, turkey always is, but the mashed potatoes were creamy and the stuffing was exactly the right amount of crispy on top. Someone found a football game on the small TV in the corner. Mrs. Patterson started a conversation about her grandchildren. David told a story about his first Thanksgiving after college, when he'd tried to cook dinner himself and nearly burned down his apartment. It was loud and chaotic and warm. It was what Thanksgiving was supposed to be. James sat across from me, piling sweet potatoes onto his plate. "Tell me about your wife," he said. "Margaret, right?" So I did. I told him about how we met at a library, both reaching for the same book on electrical engineering, how she'd challenged me to explain why my design approach was better than hers, and how we'd ended up arguing about circuit theory for 2 hours before I worked up the courage to ask her to dinner, how she'd supported me through every career change and setback, how she'd made our small house feel like a home. I told him about her illness, the cancer that had eaten away at her over 18 months, how she'd stayed sharp and funny even when the pain got bad, how her last words to me were, "Don't let Emily forget where she came from." "I failed at that," I said, my voice rough. "I let her forget, or maybe I never taught her right in the first place." "Or maybe," Mrs. Patterson interjected from the next booth, "she made her own choices. You can't control who your children become, Mr. Chen. You can only give them the tools and hope they use them wisely." The evening stretched on. We ate pie, apple, mine was declared surprisingly good, despite my doubts, pumpkin, and pecan. Someone ordered coffee. The waitress brought out whipped cream and ice cream without being asked. James insisted on paying for everything. As we were getting ready to leave, he pulled me aside. "I have something for you," he said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "I've been carrying this around for 3 months, waiting for the right moment to give it to you." "James, I don't need—" "Just look at it, please." I opened the envelope. Inside was a deed, a property deed, and a set of keys. "What is this?" "A lake house, about 60 miles from here. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, wraparound porch. It's been sitting empty since I bought it 2 years ago. I kept meaning to use it as a vacation property, but I never have time. And then I realized—" He paused. "You saved my company. You saved my dream. Let me give you something back. A place where you can have peace, where you can invite friends, family if they deserve it. Somewhere beautiful." "I can't accept this. It's too much. Robert, that lake house is worth about $1.2 million. Do you know how much I've made because of what you did for me? How many hundreds of millions? This is a drop in the bucket, a tiny fraction of what I owe you. He pressed the keys into my hand. Please, let me do this. Let me finally repay even a small part of the debt. I looked down at the keys, heavy and real in my palm. A lake house, a place by the water where Margaret had always wanted to live. Can I think about it? Take all the time you need. But Robert, the offer doesn't expire. This is yours, whenever you're ready. We exchanged phone numbers. He made me promise to call him, to stay in touch, to not be a stranger. I want to know how you're doing, he said, and if you ever need anything, anything at all, you call me, understood? I nodded, not trusting my voice. The drive home was quiet. I kept glancing at the envelope on the passenger seat, still not quite believing it was real. A lake house, financial security, and more than that, a friend. Someone who valued me not for what I could give them, but for who I was. When I got home, my phone was ringing. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Dad? Emily's voice was thick with tears. Dad, please, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I sat down heavily in my recliner, Margaret's empty chair across from me. Okay. I don't know what I was thinking. I got so caught up in trying to impress people, in trying to seem important, that I forgot. I forgot what actually matters. I forgot you. Yes, I said. You did? Can you forgive me? Can we fix this? I closed my eyes. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, wasn't it? My daughter, apologizing, wanting to reconcile. A few hours ago, I would have said yes immediately, would have told her everything was fine, would have gone back to being the father who fixed everything. But I was tired of being taken for granted, tired of being the one who always gave while everyone else took. Emily, you told people I was dead. I didn't actually say. You let them believe it. You erased me from your life because I was an inconvenience, because I didn't fit the story you wanted to tell about yourself. I took a breath. And tonight, you looked me in the eye and told me I didn't belong, that I wasn't important enough to be at your table. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Are you sorry because you realized you were wrong? Or are you sorry because James Whitmore is pulling his investment and your company is in trouble? Silence. That's what I thought, I said quietly. Dad, please. We're going to lose everything. Blake is talking about bankruptcy. We might lose the house. I don't know what to do. Figure it out, I said. You're smart. You're capable. You built a company once. You can build it again. But you need to do it with integrity this time, with honesty, without using and discarding people. But I need help. What you need, I interrupted, is to learn that actions have consequences, that you can't treat people like they're disposable, that family means something more than a source of money when you need it. So you're just going to abandon me? Her voice was rising, shifting from apologetic to angry. After everything, you're going to turn your back on your own daughter? Emily, I've been available to you your whole life. I've given you everything I could. And for the past 3 years, you've ignored me except when you wanted money. Tonight you told me I wasn't important. Well, you were right. I'm not important to you, but I'm done making that okay. This is James Whitmore's fault. He poisoned you against me. James told me the truth you should have told me years ago, that you were ashamed of me, that you saw me as something to be hidden. That's not... Emily, I'm going to say something your mother would have said if she were here. I love you. I will always love you. But I can't be in your life right now. Not like this. Not when you only want me around for what I can give you. Fine, she shouted. Fine. Be alone then. See if I care. See if I ever call you again. If that's your choice, I said softly, I'll respect it. She hung up. The dial tone buzzed in my ear until I put the phone down. I sat there in the dark house, in the silence, and I waited to feel devastated, to feel the crushing weight of losing my daughter again, possibly for good this time. But what I felt instead was relief. And beneath that, the smallest spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope.